This country was one day one of the fastest growing economies in Africa, but these days it's taken a massive turn for the worse. Which country is this? Zimbabwe. In recent years, they've been doing better to get back on track, but over the last few decades, their economy wasn't just one of the worst in southern African countries, but the entire world. So much that their GDP per capita at its lowest point was close to 2% of the world's average in 2008. What could be pushing the country behind? We always ask this when it comes to slow economic growth. Well, apart from the main political shenanigans and corruption we will get into later, their geography isn't great because it's landlocked. That's right. This means that they have no ports for trade overseas or other means of transport to travel around Africa, meaning growth and development depends mainly on its regional integration. So they gotta rely on their neighbours more than themselves. At least though, they're lucky in this regard. Being landlocked obviously isn't the best thing in the world, we can't deny it. But even if they are landlocked, they have a crazy location on the planet which made them able to turn the face of the continent. In fact, their super important location within the Southern African Development Community region makes the country an essential transit point for the neighbouring countries. Let's give Zimbabwe a big applause. They were able to take the bull by the horns. But how are they doing right now? Well, supposedly, Zimbabwe is building a better system for future economic growth and higher living standards. Real GDP growth stood at 6.5% in 2022, down from 8.5% in 2021 after achieving negative values in previous years. The growth rate of real GDP is expected to stay positive thanks to the steady rise in agricultural production. Mineral exporters profited from increased global prices, which, along with tourism, helped to drive total economic growth. They are putting in effort to clear some of their immediate problems. Extreme poverty is decreased since its peak in 2020, but it continues to stay very high from seasonal agricultural productivity and high food prices. Chronic inflation, a reliance on low productivity agriculture, sluggish structural reform, and occasional shocks such as drought, natural disasters, and the COVID-19 epidemic have all played a nasty role in halting Zimbabwe's path to a better standard. Sadly, difficulties don't just stop here. High, unsustainable debt and obligations to international financial institutions continue to constrain budgetary capacity and growth prospects. I don't really see any light at the end of this tunnel. Maybe if we go back in time, we can discover the legacy and problems behind today's Zimbabwe. The Great Zimbabwe ruins located close to the modern town of Masvingo are a modern symbol for the Shona word Zimba Zimbabwe, which means houses of stone or stone buildings. It has a super rich past that represents the diversity of its people and its history, which includes periods of conflict, hardship, and economic prosperity, in addition to periods of achievement, invention, cooperation, and wealth. 1918 marked the beginning of their economic history. Do you know why? Because it's the formal recognition of independence and the shift to majority government under the direction of Prime Minister Robert Mugabe, and the new administration that supported socialism and depended in part on foreign assistance. Soon after, in 2000, a land reform initiative was implemented by the government to seize farms owned by white people, led to political instability, corruption, and economic contraction. Should we hit the panic button now? Actually, we shouldn't have waited until 2000 to hit it. Rolling back a bit to 1990, due to persistent racial disparities in the post-colonial economy, requests for indigenous Africans to have a greater say in economic ownership were becoming louder. In 1991, for instance, the wealthiest 3% of the population were lucky enough to receive 30% of total income and less than 15% of total consumption, while half of the unlucky population obtained less than 15% of total annual income and roughly 15% of total consumption. Can you imagine how crazy inequality is there? Unbelievably high. You'd wish to be among the top 3%. Such terribly high inequality caused Zimbabwe's economy to shrink since 2000. No wonder why. Well, political unrest, capital flight, mismanagement, and corruption are strong there. But this isn't it. The economy's base of industry and agriculture has been destroyed as inflation got out of control, peaking at 500 billion% in 2009. Many Zimbabweans are beginning to work in the informal economy as the result of the state of the formal one. They had so many issues to solve before the country died down, with hyperinflation being the main problem. But before we go on to it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Among the worst instances of hyperinflation in recorded history was the one that occurred in Zimbabwe in the late 2000s. This is because it reminds us of the terrible effects that inflation can have on a country's economy and population. Can you imagine that prices of goods double almost every 24 hours? Even recently, the inflation rate hit an unbelievable 191% during the height of the country's hyperinflation in June 2022. Now you must be asking, why does Zimbabwe have such terrible inflation? What's its origins? Who made people suffer from such high prices of almost everything? Well, they experienced severe political and economic difficulties in the early 2000s, which is when the country's hyperinflation began. A problematic land reform initiative by the government caused havoc with Zimbabwe's agricultural output, which has historically been a major economic driver. These upheavals exacerbated inflation by creating a perfect storm with inadequate government, fiscal management, and unsustainable monetary policies. It's like the dice are loaded against Zimbabwe. Is this the only cause of hyperinflation there? Oh no, no, no. Things don't stop getting worse for Zimbabwe. Here is the worst. A hyperinflationary spiral was started by the government there when it attempted to print more money to cover its growing budget shortfalls. Goods and service prices increased at an unbelievable rate. Most people there could no longer afford necessities, causing a crazy drop in their standards of living. I mean, you go to sleep as a citizen from a middle-income class and wake up finding yourself in the low-income class. It's crazy there. Why isn't the government doing something to help the economy? Why are they not reacting to such a crazy drop in the standard of living? You shouldn't be surprised when we tell you that corruption and bad governance are to blame. Zimbabwe is one of the most corrupt countries in Africa. It ranked 157 out of 179 countries in terms of the Corruption Perception Index of 2020. Corruption costs Zimbabwe at least $1 billion a year, with police and local government officials being among the worst offenders, according to an analysis made by the Transparency International Zimbabwe, TIZ. Corruption is expensive. Media covers a lot of corruption scandals, but it often appears like the tales stop there. But they don't. The impact that corruption has on the economy there is greater than you might think. Zimbabwe's bad governance has disaster written all over it. Given that corruption adds extra costs to corporate operations, it poses a threat to foreign investment. Developing nations need to draw in foreign direct investment, and since corruption has twisted Zimbabwe's financial and economic landscape, the nation is losing out on any capital inflows. Economic development is currently at terribly low levels, and corruption plays a crazy important role in this, as well as the inefficiency of governmental service delivery and the extreme inequality in resource distribution. You think we're exaggerating? The GINI coefficient that measures wealth inequality has increased dramatically in the past few years. That's exactly when the fat hit the fire. Numbers and statistics don't lie, but if you still don't believe us, no problem. Photos won't lie. Take a look and compare the types of homes being constructed in Harare's beautiful suburbs with the misery on the opposite side of the city. Inequality is skyrocketing there. Did you know that on WhatsApp and other social media sites, Zimbabweans frequently share pictures of homes that some of the nation's highest ranked leaders are building? If you ever visited Zimbabwe, or even just by looking at the images on the internet, you'll be shocked and you will be wondering if such houses are hotels or simply ordinary homes. It's like the government there is hanging poor people out to dry. Wouldn't it be much more beneficial if such resources were allocated to the construction of factories and enterprises that provide jobs for the whole society? You'd hope so, because currently studies have found that the growth rate is lowered by roughly 0.72% for every 1% increase in corruption. We've been talking a lot about problems and challenges. What about a solution? Well, here is a 4-step solution to reviving the economy of Zimbabwe. Step 1. Cash injection. Hard cash would be the first instrument the government would need to even begin to spark a recovery. Since 2009, when the previous Zimbabwean dollar was destroyed by hyperinflation, Zimbabwe hasn't had a currency of its own. Since then, both the US dollar and the South African rand have been the primary currencies used for trade. Additionally, the economy, which is now half the size as it was at the start of the millennium, has gradually been choked by a cash deficit in recent years. Now let's assume the money shows up. What happens next? Economic measures that are unpopular with international investors would have to be abandoned by Mr. President, which takes us to step 2. Dump false policies and stamp out corruption. For many years, corruption has been a significant barrier to Zimbabwe's economic expansion. White farmers lost a great deal of their farmland, which was eventually acquired by army generals and the political elite who had little to no experience in farming. Farms just got messed up. Similarly, companies that were eventually run by individuals with greater political clout than business acumen typically failed. Thanks to corruption, Private investors are like a dead man walking. Now, what's next? Step 3. Negotiate with foreign lenders. Zimbabwe has been in arrears on $9 billion in foreign debt for almost 20 years. The debt has to be restructured, most likely with support from the World Bank and IMF. That takes us to step 4. Establish the framework to lower unemployment and encourage the fleeing population to come home. Formal occupations are few there. The rate of unemployment is over 8% in 2022 and has been increasing since 2014. So, improving the investment climate and observing the inflow of capital ought to have a significant immediate impact on the rate of unemployment. Here is a fact, a shocking one. An estimated 3 million Zimbabweans have left their country to live abroad after the severe economic conditions that arose throughout the previous 20 years. They too possess abilities that could help with the economy's reconstruction. However, people must believe that they are coming to a stable and secure place, both politically and financially. Why return if not? Economies take years to collapse, and they typically take considerably longer to recover. Will Zimbabwe's economy be able to be taken off life support and at least begin to revive soon? Analysts are highly doubtful that there is even a rapid fix. The nation's enthusiasm has undoubtedly increased optimism for the future, but significant changes in government policy are required if these positive feelings are to have a positive economic impact. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons to receive more content. See you in the next video.